Oh.
Mm. Both are back now. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
for some reason, every time I start up the game, maybe I just need to remember to start up the game before I start streaming every time. Because that seems to be like every time I start it up, it's just like, it's always crap.
Oh, so like it starts and then like it
Yeah,
just
it's like
crashes and
it's
then you
like
fail.
well, it's like the stream will start, um, but then like when I actually will turn on like the game if I want to like do anything else, my computer is just like, nope, sorry, that is too much to handle. All right, too much for me to bear.
Yeah.
All right, but it seems like it's back. All right, so
Okay.
so talk to me. So you said that you watched the debate, right?
Yeah, I had the luxury of sitting through it a couple times.
So, I don't know. Give me like, what are your initial thoughts right now? Because right now I'm still kind of processing through it, and I'm going to be reviewing it with my chat, or with my stream after this.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for sure.
So I'm going to go through and like, we're going to go through all the individual arguments, just kind of see what's what. Because I mean, like, if there's any merit to the arguments, then I want to acknowledge them. But my intuition afterwards, I mean, it sounded like a lot of them. I mean, like, I read several subreddits and I read several posts that, like, apparently AJW is misrepresenting a lot of facts.
Yes.
And so, like, but I need to read more into exactly like what the misrepresentations were, if any. So
Yeah. So something that I thought was, I mean, I sent you a very vague tweet, DM, one of those message earlier today.
okay,
Because I got a vibe from AJW that I mean this in the nicest way possible. I don't believe anything that he says ever.
hmm.
Where it feels like maybe you got this vibe in the conversation as well, where he alludes to a certain type of knowledge that might not exist. Um, the best example I could give for you, which again, I think I put it in your general earlier today because I thought it was the most Chad, and it would be a Chad answer if anybody on the left said that, but you question him directly about CR, like what he defines it as and
Mm-hmm.
what his interpretation is. And honestly, I think that's probably the most important thing. Where if you consume information about a particular topic, you want to be able to, the best of your ability, um, regurgitate that in such a way where it's yours. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, you want to make
Um,
sure that you understand exactly what it is that you're criticizing or advocating for.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Because something that tends to happen, I think we're all guilty to this at some point in academia, right? Where we are so used to being absorbing knowledge, and then
Mm-hmm.
when we have to like, it's like, let's go. Well, in this thing back in, it gets really messy.
Right.
I wrote down what he said. It was incredible to me. Here it is. You asked him. It's early. You asked him, based on your readings, what do you think critical race theory is? Because something that I noticed that he was like skirting around that, where he kept catering, and again, I don't want to spoil it too much for your review, is that he continued to cater to authority when
Mm-hmm.
he was definitely rhetorically cornered.
Hmm.
So like he would go on some like rant of saying things like, whenever they're proven factually wrong, they fall back. Well, you don't understand that there are these things that are related, and that means that you're living in a white supremacist society, and this is not an objective discipline. And then you ask him very directly, like, based on your reading, what do you think critical race theory is? And then he says, and I'm quoting here, well, you read the scholars of critical race theory and they define it. And I was just like,
Uh,
what? Like, because comparatively, it's like, based on your readings, what do you think capitalism is? Well, if you listen to the capitalists and read what they say, they define it. It's like, okay, but so he's very lucid there, or loose on that. But I guess something that I'm wondering for you, or I guess I get where your thoughts are,
Mhm.
where, I guess, again, like, I don't consider these debates, right? Because I respect the shit out of you and you're awesome. And I don't necessarily think that, like, having argumentative stuff, you know what I'm saying? Like, I respect you. I think you respect me. I think.
Oh,
We'll
like
find
this?
out.
Yeah. No. Oh, you're talking about us talking right now. Yeah, no, I 100%. Yeah, no, I absolutely. We're just
Because
talking.
I don't. Yeah. Like, a thought that I have is, like, what are certain, I guess, not necessarily objections, but certain questions that you have coming from a law background with something like CRT?
Okay, so you want to know like what my issues with it were?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like taking like the best faith read of it. So like the first is that like I guess that there's like a handful, right? The first is that as I was studying and getting ready for the debate, there were a lot of people who, so like I watched several interviews, and I watched several people talk about it, and there were some people who either did a very bad job explaining what it was, so it made it harder for me to advocate or to not, or to oppose. Like, it made it harder for me to talk about it generally.
Yes.
And so it doesn't seem like they're now. I feel like, and this is kind of how I started out the debate, right? Like, I feel like, I can draw on like general themes where it's like, if we look at like the majority of the scholarship on this, like this seems to be like the main things that this theory talks about. But I guess like I still don't have like a super solid, like a single, like, I mean, like this is, I don't know, like there's plenty of terms which are kind of like this, right? Like socialism, communism are like this apparently too, right? Where it's like very hard to find like a concrete definition that everyone agrees on. But like with critical race theory, it's like I think I know like what the parts about it are that I agree with, but it's hard to tell like if there are certain things that other people have advocated for that are representative of the theory as a whole, or if those are just kind of like fringe interpretations. Like, for example, there's certain aspects of critical race theory, and you can correct me if this is like a misreading of it, but it seems like there's some aspects that seem to say that like so you begin with like, all right, so we can go like premise, conclusion, right? So we can be like premise one, systemic racism exists in society, right? That's where we begin, right? Like there are things in society which disparately mistreat people of color compared to white people, right? Step two is that this ends up creating like over the broad aggregate, or actually I guess like step two is that like this can manifest overtly or covertly. So like, there can be laws which say, we discriminate against X group of people explicitly, or there can also be laws which say that, which don't necessarily say that they discriminate against X group of people, but which have that effect, right? Which end up like having that effect regardless of whether or not it says it explicitly, Step three is that by virtue of having these laws in society, then you end up having a disproportionately negative impact on people of color, which ends up manifesting in like a capitalist, or like in the kind of society that we have right now, to put them into like a lower financial class, or a lower socioeconomic class generally. And I think that all of those tenets I broadly agree with, like that tracks on my understanding. But then there are some additional steps. Like, for example, there's like an idea that like, oh, racism is inherent to society. Like this is going to happen no matter what. There's an idea that I read that like, oh, hold on. That white people, and I mean like this is, I can see the merit for this, but there are some people I've seen like have very uncharitable reads of this, where it's like, because white people generally are not negatively impacted and benefit, and instead benefit from these kinds of systemic imbalances, then they are less likely to do anything about them, which I broadly agree with that kind of reading, but some people, or I guess like I can't say a specific example. I guess I'm worried that some people might take that to mean like, oh, white people are inherently bad, right? I can understand that people are going to be less likely to argue against things which they aren't negatively impacted, or which they benefit, but like, I guess that's something I'm like a little iffy on. And then like, and then there are some readings that like, oh, and the reason why people ultimately try to preserve racism is because, they're worried about the rise of communism. I guess that's like the totality of like my sort of understandings and then issues.
Yeah. So there's a few things I guess I'll make clear with you is that that sounds so weird to say, but there are parts of critical race theory that I'm sure we're on the same boat where I like agree with, and then the evidence supports that.
Hmm.
Something that I think gets murky, and this is probably the same thing that you ran into, is that there are, and this is probably the same with a lot of analysis of social phenomena, social, political, economic phenomena, where there's like accepted patterns within bodies of work, and then within those authors and researchers, scholars, however you want to call them, there's different branches out, and then that's where the disagreements start to lie.
Hmm.
Because even within some of the, so even the quote unquote bigger guns that AJW cited as an example, oh god, he cited Derek Bell. Um, I think he may have cited Kimberly Crenshaw as well, and even someone like William Slate. There's not necessarily wide differences in some of the things that they argue,
Hmm.
but there's enough where you have to read a bit more into the perspective, and some of them they've even abandoned. Right, like there's one thing that I think is really, I know this to be true, generally speaking, is that where if you are a student in the 1970s studying this, as society changes, your opinion about the issues is going to change with it as well.
Hmm.
And
Can you explain more
the
on that?
yeah, so Charles V. Hamilton, he wrote Black Power, and he co-wrote it with Kwame Ture. And something that he mentions in his old age now, because I think he's like 90 years old right now. Let's say right now, I think he's 90 years old, older than that. He mentions that the way that he viewed the world deeply changed based on his ideology.
Hmm.
And that one of the problems that he has with certain individuals who were closer to Marxist Leninists, I'm paraphrasing a lot of information here,
Okay.
is that there's an evolution of the ideology, and sometimes people can't let that go. So they'll look at Charles Hamilton in his 80s and 90s and think, oh, he's still a communist. And then he's like, well, I don't identify as a communist, a Democrat, or Republican. This is just what I observe and what I believe to be going on. And that might be different than what I may have said a couple of years ago, maybe in a book or in a conversation, but my opinion about this may have changed. And sometimes what I think um, AJW is an example, and other people who are sort of dissenters, is that these individuals are stuck within these observations.
Hmm.
When really in reality is that they evolve. Like people's opinions evolve over time. Like a good example that I give that's a meme, but he says it. He's not anything within CRT, but Thomas Sowell was a Marxist, and he was a self-described Marxist for a good majority of his life, and then he got a job, five head, and then started like going down that route that people now know as Thomas Sowell, as like an economist and a pretty yikes take individual.
Hmm.
But I guess my point here is that something that I think people have to start doing, like even to people within dissenting opinions, is being wary about what you read and the time that you read it and within the context of where what they're saying. As
Hmm.
example, like Derek Bell is very I don't want to say separatist, but he held the belief for a very long time that and this is kind of consistent among I shouldn't say a few, a decent amount of Black Americans, is that if the systems are not made for Black people, then why are we choosing to play this game?
Hmm.
Which then goes into sort of like separatist routes. But then what that reads for some people who read it in 2021, and AJW fell into this trap where it's like, well, they're against integration. And it's like, that's not necessarily the perspective. The perspective asks a pretty valid question, which is if you're in a system that isn't designed for you legislatively, for instance,
Hmm.
how can you trust an integrationalist system? or this idea of like, okay, well now we're going to let you in. A good example of this, right, is within the 14th Amendment, where the 14th Amendment um, does a very good job at being contradicted and then reaffirmed, right? So, like,
What do you
one
mean by that?
thing, yeah. So, if we go, because I was mentioning this on my stream earlier with the Emancipation Proclamation, right? The Emancipation Proclamation didn't give now free Africans citizenship.
Mm.
So the question is, like, in the basically the root of that question is, are Black people in America citizens? And with the Emancipation Proclamation from the jump, the answer is no. And then we have to wait a pretty decent amount of time till we run into separate but equal. So separate but equal, and basically that whole doctrine, and the year is escaping me right now, but basically within that, it said, like, within the 14th Amendment, I should say, it's like, hey, you can, like, yes, Black people are citizens, but you don't need to be around them if you don't want to. We'll just make separate facilities for them and you'll be fine, right? Like, that'll be good, right? And then that led to Plessy versus Ferguson. And then even though, like, within the arguments of Plessy versus Ferguson, there's a contradiction of itself. Like, how can separate but equal exist alongside the 14th Amendment, which says, and I'm going to paraphrase here, right? It's like nor shall any state deny that any person within its jurisdiction with the equal protection of the laws. And like, it's like, okay, it's like these two things are kind of contradicting each other. And it's not until 1954 with Brown v. Board of Education that it's finally definitive, like, yes, Black people are citizens and separating them is wrong. Like 1954.
Right.
And
I mean, like, could I just, I mean, like,
yeah.
just because I mean, like, I recently had to learn about this in constitutional law, right? And usually the argument, so, the whole, so basically, like, when we look at, like, discussion about, like, separate but equal, the way, like, the reason that existed was because, like, there were people who were, like, explicitly racist historically, right? Like, they're definitely, like, after the Emancipation Proclamation, freedom of slave, like, yeah, like, at that time, there were absolutely still people who were racist in the country, and they were going to still try to do racist shit, right? And I get that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, like, as far as the legalese, right? So basically, what a lot of those, I don't know, maybe we actually don't disagree. This might just be, like, clarifying, because, like, essentially what a lot of those people tried to do, like a lot of people who were, like, overtly racist, their thinking was like, okay, so what could we do within the confines of the law to be able to push to still have negative treatment or disparate treatment of people of color, right? And so the separate but equal doctrine was basically the way to kind of, like, cheat around, like, it was kind of like their idea of, like, cheating around the 14th Amendment, because, like, their justification was, well, listen, I mean, we aren't negatively treating anyone, you know, it's separate but equal, right? Exactly. And so the whole argument had to show that, like, listen, like, even if you try to the best of your ability to have, like, quote unquote equal, equal schools, like, there's still negative impacts observed from separating out people, right? Like, it still is recognizing people as, like, a categorical other and oftentimes a lesser, right? Like, I'm pretty sure it wasn't in Brown v. Board of Education, like, the dolls test, where it showed that, like, like, there were little girls who were, like, given dolls, and, it was shown that, like, the girls, like, would be given, like, dolls where it's like white people or white children and Black children, and they would be asked, like, hey, which is better? And they would say that, like, oh, the white doll was better, right? Like, it still had psychological effects, even though people try to argue that, like, separate but equal was equal treatment under the law. Like, we were able to observe that, like, actually that wasn't the case, and that's what it took to overturn it, right?
And even with using, to piggyback what you're saying there, within Brown and Board of Education, and this is why I'm glad you pushed back as hard as you did when it came to the idea of stories and anecdotes. Where because within Brown and Board of Education, it brought up a very, like, important question, which is infrastructure part of the school experience, because the family that was involved with this, like their children had to walk over a mile just to get to a bus to get to their school, when there was a school within blocks away of their house. So it's like, how, like, why would you have your child go over a mile, greater than that, across, again, like across railroad lines to get to a bus to get to your school, get to a school, when they could just walk to the school that's down the street? And it's like, well, that's whites only. And it's like, hang on, like, does anybody else within this white only school have to walk a mile to get to a bus to get to the school?
Right.
Probably not. Like, so something here isn't quite equal from the jump. Because like for me, like I consider school infrastructure, like the ability of like just taking, like getting to a bus or walking to your place of education, as part of the system that should be quote unquote separate but equal, right? Like in a separate but equal system, there would be an almost like, okay, this individual or this family lives over a mile away from the school, so we'll make sure the bus route goes to that school, and then like maybe then there'd be like a better argument to be had, but that's not what happened. And then like when you pull the lens out, right, like there were other Americans across the United States having similar experiences with the quality of schools that they're going to that are quote separate but equal.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I guess it's like, I don't know. I see a lot of like this history, or at least this is kind of like my read, like coming out of, now my second year of law school, right? It seems to be the case where essentially like there are a lot of people who are in positions of power who are racist in the country. Like that is absolutely true. If we learn nothing from Trump, that is absolutely the case, right? And so like a big problem that the legal system often faces is essentially like trying to craft new law and policy in such a way as it minimizes the ability for these people to be able to act on those racist preferences and to be able to negatively impact people of color, right? And with each time we try to fix the issue, people are going to try and find like new ways to be able to cheat the system, or try to invent like new ways, right? This isn't necessarily. I mean, it kind of has to do with like issues of systemic racism and like addressing it with policy, right? But like the filibuster, for example, like that actually was. I don't know if you're aware of this, right? But like that wasn't something intended by the people who wrote the Constitution, right? That was actually like something which is that is essentially just like something that is born out of a loophole in Senate rules. And so like with the filibuster, right? There's a real I think the strongest argument for getting rid of it is that like even if you're like, a lot of people go around like, oh, I'm a constitutional conservative, a constitutional originalist conservative, right? Like the filibuster wasn't even intended by the founding fathers. It was just kind of, discovered by, back in the day, I believe it was Republicans, who basically discovered like, oh shit, this is a way to basically be able to like stop all legislation that we don't like, like it's an anti-democratic movement. But like, but then the goal legislatively is to try and get rid of it so that we can like so we can take away their ability to be able to stifle democracy, right? And so similarly, like with the kind of legislation, with the kind of issues we're talking about, the goal should be like, to try and like every time an issue comes up to try and resolve it, and then when ultimately people figure out a new way to be able to cheat the system and a new issue arises, then then we take each issue as they come up.
Correct.
Or at least. Or sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say something that I think is frustrating for me. There aren't, and this is kind of where I'm pilled on this. I'm very pilled on this. I want to make this clear.
Okay.
So I don't think that there are currently, and how like all these structures exist currently. I don't think there are a lot of solutions to legislative problems. I feel like what happens is there's sort of compromises where there's this desire to make sure that each side gets something.
Yeah, I get that.
However, my concern is that the times where there are pushes towards, in this case, social change or social progress, there isn't that same level of bipartisanship. Like even as and what concerns me about that is you'll have something like if I'm using historically, right, like the founding of the United States, and really all it came up like the Civil War was inevitable due to the compromising of the expansion. So it's like after the Louisiana Purchase, like basically the question was always like, are these is this territory slaveholding or non-slaveholding?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's slaveholding, then there's certain benefits. If there's non-slaveholding, there's other benefits. But basically, every single time we expanded, there's always like that question of like, which one is it going to be? And it's always wants to be like this idea of like down the middle. Even with if we like fast forward to the Washington D.C. statehood argument, something that I think Republicans are I don't want to say misrepresenting. Maybe they know this. Like I think that a compromise in that situation, if I believe there's aren't really like clean solutions right now, there's only compromises, is roping Puerto Rico in there as well.
Oh, interesting.
And making the
why is
argument,
that?
okay, like if DC becomes a state, then Puerto Rico becomes a state. They already have a non-voting representative that is a registered Republican within the House of Reps. So that automatically is on its face would imply that like, oh, this is our Republicans helping Republicans here. And then Democrats get DC, Republicans asterisk and 30 pages of fine print would potentially get Puerto Rico. Because something that I argue is that whoever is in the forefront of Puerto Rican statehood, that party could potentially have a majority in that now state. Now, there's other things that obviously that come with Puerto Rico. I don't want to get into that too much, but that's what I mean, like in terms of like certain levels of compromise. But I think that sometimes what ends up happening is that when there is push to social change, there isn't really that bipartisanship that we would want to see. Not that we would want to see, but rather it's because like even now with Joe Biden, there's this like desire of like we gotta like just meet in the not necessarily meet in the middle, but just like we gotta make sure that Republicans and Democrats are working together, which I understand. Right. Like these are people who work together in the same building, so you want to cooperate with your coworkers. But at the same time, there's like the question of like, what are we like? What are the compromises here? Like what's each side getting? And I think something that happens is with these compromises can lead to poor outcomes.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. I mean, like I'm very firmly in agreement that like a really big problem, especially at the federal level, and this is like I'm glad that I've had the opportunity to be able to work at the state and federal level because you can kind of see the differences. That like I think this is a really big current problem at the federal level and starting to become a problem at the state level if it isn't already currently a problem. If it isn't already currently a problem in like a certain state, right? Where the Republican Party in large part, so like step one, they realize that a lot of their voters don't actually care as much about particular policy issues as much as they care about theater politics. So step two, what actually gets more voter support isn't actually advocating for good policy, but is just being as combative with other politicians or like people from the other side as possible. Step three, that necessarily means that they're going to be very likely, if not, they're almost certainly going to be acting in bad faith, defining bad faith as being like not extending any charitability to the other side, no matter what they say. And so like it ends up creating the situation where the Republican Party is incentivized to act broadly in bad faith because it's what ends up winning them the most elections, right? And it makes it really hard to do democracy when one party is in large part not actually acting in bad faith because it's not in their voters' interest necessarily.
And then what makes matters weird, right? Like something that I recommend you watching is the Florida Board of Education meeting around critical race theory. And what you see is that theatrics playing out where basically every dissenting opinion, or really opinion in support, because now we're in the future and we know the Board of Education adopted this, is that every advocate opinion is parroting the exact same thing. So, and I think that what's great about Broadway is that if you play a Broadway musical at the same time, enough people are going to learn the songs. And like, or if you see a movie enough times, you're going to start learning the lines. So it's just a matter of just like keeping the message consistent from the top down across a certain particular topic. It doesn't even have to be true, but what I'm noticing with CRT is that the theatrics worked, and now it's in law.
Mm-hmm.
So something that I don't remember if it came up, but the bills that are being currently passed and introduced are almost identical to each other. In terms, and it's literally in a lot of ways just the talking points of CRT. I made a tweet about it. I'll put it in your stream chat.
Okay.
But basically, how do I advance Twitter search again? Why am I this old?
I don't know.
I just wrote advanced Twitch search instead of advanced Twitter search in Google. I'm falling apart. Twitch needs a new name. Okay, so CRT. And then my name. So I'm going to speed run this tweet with you.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the first one that I mentioned is House Bill 1775 in Oklahoma. And basically, I'm going to paraphrase like certain parts of it in interest of time. Like, no teacher, administrator, or other employee or school district, charter school, or virtual charter school shall require or make part of their course the following concepts. And A, one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. B, an individual by virtue of his or her race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. And it just goes down the laundry list.
Mm-hmm.
But then if we look at House Bill 322 in Ohio, it says the exact same thing. One race, like teachers, blah, 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 can't do, blah, 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 blah. Line one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. 2, an individual by virtue of the individual's race or sex is inherently racist, sexist, oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. And they just hit the points line for line for line across laws. Yep. And then I look at that and go, shit, because there's no, how do I say this? There's no, if something is misunderstood and then ends up in a law based on that misunderstanding,
it's going to be more likely to end up in other laws.
What was that again? I'm sorry.
Like, it's going to be more likely that other states will adopt that same law, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then like, and something that I argue with CRT is that I'm not necessarily worried about CRT like, I guess to make something incredibly clear, what people think, there's not going to be classes called Critical Race Theory 1, Critical Race Theory 2. You're probably going to get something more like ethnic studies or race in the law or social, like, I don't know, that I can't make course titles, but basically classes where, okay, this class is designed to talk about how the laws interact with society and how like laws and social progress are in a weird kind of tap dance. And someone mentions in your chat, Mayor McCheese, that's a fucking name of history. And that's my concern, where I think that these laws, based on their wording, are going to have the impact of making history harder to teach. And even within House Bill 322, it cites that racism is merely a deviation of racism and slavery is a deviation of American values. And it's like, what does that even mean? Like,
so wait. Are they saying that like essentially it would start outlawing like the teaching of just like racism in America?
Yeah. So like, for instance, this is line 11, like point 11 in House Bill 322, that with respect to the relationship to the American values, slavery and racism, and anything other than a deviation from, portrayals of, or failures to live up to the authentic founding principles of the United States, which include liberty and equality.
Wait, this is saying that they can't. Wait, so what's it? So it's saying that they can't teach anything that's. So basically, they can't teach as if these are like founding thing, like founding, like that slavery was baked into the foundation of America.
Yeah.
Okay, that's tracking,
then,
which seems to be not accurate.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's quite a deviation.
Yeah, exactly.
It's quite a deviation that required quite a lot of laws and Supreme Court decisions and amendments to really like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Like literally, like the country was founded with racism, if not like as a foundational aspect, as one of the foundational aspects.
Yeah. And some,
and so like to teach like that was somehow like not an aspect of like the founding of our nation is just misrepresenting history in that instance.
And something that like, and the reason why I say is that type of a precedent, again, just to be clear, it's only been introduced, so there's probably going to be amendments that might get slashed right away, hopefully. But something that's on my mind is like, okay, if I understand that I was taught that within the founding of the United States and within the Constitution, there were, again, slaveholding interests and non-slaveholding interests. And then there were compromises based on that. Those compromises led to obviously poor outcomes because we had like the 3/5 clause. So it still led to, and despite this compromise, it led to, I think, like 7 or 8, like a majority of the first like 15 presidents coming from Virginia. So it's like, okay, this is quite an interesting compromise.
Sure.
Because again, like something that I think tracks pretty well is that I don't really, I guess, like to explain my perspective a bit, I don't really treat social issues as statements, but more questions. So as an example, if I were to use the recent kink at Pride discourse, I would say that like that's not really, I wouldn't consider that like a statement. It would be like the question being is that are certain types of sexual expression allowed in public places? And then my brain goes, no, question mark. But then it gets more complicated. But I think something that happens a lot of the times is, not to get too deep in that discourse, but like a lot of times people just default to certain things, like as an example, like slavery is bad. It's like, okay, great, I agree, but what do we do about it? It's like, I free them. Okay, cool. All right, they're free. Are they citizens? No, you told us to free them. I was like, oh, god damn it. Then what are we gonna do? We're gonna make amendments. Okay, great. and then you know what I'm saying? Where it's like, and then it leads to other things. So like in regards to police brutality, like the question that I have is, are police officers treating citizens the way that they would want to be treated? Broadly speaking, I think the answer is yes. When you look at isolated incidents across the United States, there's like, okay, this yes has an asterisk with it. So let's explore what that asterisk is.
So your position is that broadly speaking, police treat people the way they want to be treated?
Sort of. I think that it's possible that, I shouldn't say not possible, it definitely exists, that pockets of this, if I believe that we still function under de facto segregation, then it's very possible for entire communities to not have these negative experiences with police officers. So then when they see like a George Floyd or an Ahmaud Arbery or excuse me, a Breonna Taylor, they're looking at and going, well, that's not all police officers. It's just a few bad apples. And it's like, okay, but aren't those bad, again, with like, I try to ask things in questions, wouldn't those bad apples affect how you function? If we look at, for instance, like, God, I'm going to use this example because I'm kind of a coomer, but like if we look at hot tub streams, it's like, what type of, like, what is too much for a stream? That's kind of the question, I think, where it's like, what is too sexually suggestive or sexually explicit to have on Twitch? Granted, I don't think Twitch really answered that question. They just kind of made it its own category and said, ask us again in a couple months.
Yeah,
But
when it's not profitable anymore. Yeah.
yeah, and that's kind of where I function. I think for dissenters of CRT, if I kind of circle it back, I think something that if you ever run into these conversations again, I think, and you tried to do this, by the way, I think really just pinpointing how the laws and society interact with each other can be really powerful. As example, like if I'm using the same kind of line in the point of the conversation when Destiny cited Board v Ed, that was a majority Supreme Court decision, and that Supreme Court decision wasn't it. They still like there was like what's called, I'm sure you know, it's like Brown 2, where basically all the attorney general, a vast majority, I think, of the attorney generals in the United States went to the Supreme Court to like make suggestions of how to implement desegregation because they didn't really solve that question. Like how, because it creates again, like if I think things are questions, it just creates another question. Like how do we desegregate schools? And then they're like, shit, we don't know. So I think that might be a way of tackling it. But I think something that's kind of weird is I think people tend to separate the social part with the law part. And I think I strongly feel those two are very important. I went on a lot there. I'm sorry.
No, you're all good. So can I ask you, unless there's more that we want to talk about here, I just want to ask you, so like, what would you define, like if you were to give me a succinct definition of critical race theory, like what would you define it as? Like just from your perspective, having read and been familiar with the literature.
Yeah, I would consider it an analysis and framework to look at not only the laws within society, but also how society interacts with the laws and how those two things broadly interact with race. And then obviously there's like extrapolations of that. If I were to like expand on that a little bit, everybody is going to have different relationships with all of these systems of power. When I'm saying systems of power, I'm going to simplify it to political and economic structures. Those two, like I am currently, I say currently because ask me again in a couple of years, I'm a straight black man with a couple of health problems here and there, like nothing too crazy, but I wear glasses. My heart beats a little faster than normal, and I'm 5'8". These are just parts of who I am. Because of these things, I'm gonna have different relations. Also, like I lived in like a rural suburban hybrid for a vast majority of my life. I also went to like all of these things come together to create my interaction with these systems. And what tends to happen is that it's possible for me, with all of my check boxes of who I am, to have similar interactions, or someone else can have similar interactions that I'm having. But that doesn't necessarily mean we might look the same. However, something that can happen is that a large group of people can have interactions with a political or economic system the exact same way, or a similar way. Maybe not exactly, closer to similar, I think is a better way of describing it. And I think CRT, and again, not in a vacuum, I think CRT is like one part of many different ways of analyzing this. It's like one part of being able to look at these things. It's like, okay, why do these laws and policies lead to these outcomes for this group of people? And when I say this group of people, it might be majority black. It might be majority Asian. It might be majority white. Like, that's just going to be inevitable. But also, like, there's going to be people also in the fringe. Like, you might have something, if you pull the lens up, that, like, disproportionately affects black people. But you're going to have other people who also have the same experience. But that doesn't mean you're not going to help those people. I think that's something that's how do I say this? There's some people who I think believe that CRT is only designed to help Black people. Kind of like how people think that feminism is only designed to help women. When it's like, no, that's not necessarily the case. Like, being able to look at these things and tackle these issues would help everyone.
Mhm.
You know?
That makes sense. Can I ask you then? I think that answers my question about what it is, or reasonably. So one thing that Sean focused a lot on was that CRT, like his main objection is that like a large tenet of it is storytelling. That doesn't seem to track with a lot of, if any, of what you discussed. So what's your understanding of how storytelling falls into the discipline? So I saw him tweeting the
Sure.
day after, and it
Yeah,
seems like there's
so
literature on it.
yes, there is literature of stories and stories of individuals, but I think something that gets kind of lost is, and this might, I don't know if this answers it very directly here, is that we use stories to understand how people deal with phenomena. A good example of this being, um, we have a singular, not really a singular idea of what the Middle Passage was, but the only reason why we know that one of the only reasons, there's a bunch, obviously, but one
Mhm.
of the reasons why we know that chattel slavery was a much different phenomena than slavery as historically known is through the stories of actual slaves. So there's not going to be this sort of historical, like, well, if we analyzed how enslaved Africans were compared to the Irish, then there's clearly based on this analysis, like that didn't exist. So what
Mhm.
we had to do and have to do sometimes is rely on how, like, the whatever documentation we have to talk about this thing, and to take a kind of take a gut punch, and it's gonna upset some of my fellow Roman Catholics out there. The Bible is an anecdote, and a very powerful anecdote used as, whether it be the law of the land or the law within church doctrine, or within like what we ought to do. So we already do this. We already use stories as a means of understanding phenomena.
Well,
But I
I
think
mean,
yeah, go for it.
yeah, I think that people would say that like well, I think that a lot of people, I could see a reasonable criticism to be raised basically saying that like um by people saying that we shouldn't rely on the Bible as a means for legislating, not only because of the fact that it's primary, like, that's a religious doctrine, right? But also by virtue of the fact that it is primarily story. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
guess that here, the criticism that was raised, if we're steel manning, is that like relying on storytelling as a matter of legislative or legislation or educating, runs into issues of empirical verification.
Yes.
Um, compared to other disciplines. So I guess I'm wondering, like, if it tries to use what do you call it? Like I guess I'm asking, like, how does does the discipline use it as a way of avoiding empiric criticism or empiric verification of their beliefs? And if not, then how does storytelling kind of supplement kind of the other analyses that the discipline engages in?
Oh yeah. So a good example I could give, my brain did a very deep brain fart there. What I was thinking about was the I'm gonna use a big old anecdote to sort of bring my point home. It's called The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Aluda Aquilano, and he was a enslaved African who survived the Middle Passage. And the reason why we know of his experience is because he wrote about it. So we have documentation as a way of understanding what his experience was, so that we can, so like that, and what that singular anecdote does is reinforced the idea that the way that America, what we now know as the Americas, or colonizers, I should say, how they treated Africans who went through the Middle Passage, it wasn't the same thing. Like the phenomena of what they were going through was not the same as they were in Africa, if that makes sense. It's because Africans enslaved people, but it wasn't from the same way or within the same type of objectives. That's something that I learned within when I was first like I'll say when I first was studying this, but that was like a piece of it that I learned, where it was like, or a part of like in terms of like the history of slavery, where it's like, okay, these two things are different, and it's like, okay, well, why are these two things different? So okay, we have to now read or look into not only like the stories of individuals, but certain texts and documents that exist. And I think something that gets lost is that people believe, I don't know, I wish I knew why. I wish I knew like where this comes from, is that the forefront of CRT is based on only anecdotes and stories, and nobody is meant to be criticized, because if they're criticized, it's the criticism of white supremacy. It's like, hang on, like I don't think that exists at all, where these we're using in certain cases stories and the perspectives of Black Americans, indigenous folks, because that's all we have to really understand how these laws and these social practices interact with each other.
Okay.
If that makes any type of sense.
Yeah. So if I could kind of like represent to you what I think I understand it to be, like, usually I think that this is kind of like the implication with like, oh, it's storytelling, right? They're not relying on any kind of empirical evidence. I think that basically, the idea, as I'm kind of hearing it from you, is that like, we're able to, so like step one, laws exist. Step two, these laws disparately affect people negatively. We can observe in broad trends. And then step three, we can use stories to be able to like get down to a nitty gritty level of being able to like look at these otherwise empirically observable phenomena and see how they impact people on an individual level. Does that kind of make sense? Or is that kind of what you're suggesting?
Yeah. Like, as an example, like people would say, I'm gonna use certain arguments that I hear people say in terms of bathrooms. Because like my one friend, Mason, people would say something to Mason like, Mason should use the girls' bathroom because they were born a girl. And it's like, Mason's a man. And it's like, but they were born a girl. Clearly they identify as a man. If we're all in, what's the word? I'm gonna
intents and purposes.
Intents and purposes is they are a man. Mason is a man. Therefore, why should Mason use the women's bathroom? And then instead of at any point going, what do you think about this, Mason? There's just this sort of outside analysis of everybody except for the people where, I guess to your point, of the like, there's just all this outside analysis of individuals without going to the people where they would be affected. So all CRT is trying to do is recenter Black, Indigenous, and people of color's voices and experiences, not only with the laws, but how society interacts with them.
Okay, so that's actually that makes sense. So basically, if I can understand it, maybe this is another way to put it. I'll give you a statement. You can tell me this is representative. So essentially, there's like so step one, we want to be able to study phenomena from an empiric level. Step two, the people who conduct that analysis are probably going to bring in some biases, especially if they're primarily from a privileged background. So step three, they might end up conducting their analysis in such a way where it ends up leaving out the perspectives of those people who are affected, who might have, in such a way, like to such a degree where it ends up actually misrepresenting or not fully capturing what is the empiric truth. So this ends up being like a critique of how these issues are largely discussed in society from an empiric level. Does that kind of represent what I'm hearing? Okay.
And an example that you could give is, or I guess an example that we could use as a reinforcement I have a very soft place in my heart for this politician. They're sadly on the Hillary Clinton timeline or Hillary Clinton family tree, but Patrick Moynihan. So, I'm sure you're familiar with Patrick Moynihan, right? Maybe.
Remind me.
All right. So Patrick Moynihan is a senator former senator, now passed from New York.
Okay.
So he is the precursor of Hillary. Like when he retired in 01, Hillary took his seat. And what he created what he wrote was the Moynihan Report, which was an analysis of the phenomenon that's happening with Black people in the United States. And that report, as I try to type and cite at the same time, basically to LBJ's credit, he said like, hey, like, I want to get rid of poverty. And it's like, okay. And it's like, I want to research it. Okay, great. So he tasked Patrick Moynihan to look into it. And to some parts of it, in terms of his analysis of Black poverty, his analysis of like how we got here was pretty okay. You know, like the analysis of like, because we promised Black people X and Y things, we didn't do that legislatively, we didn't do that socially, and now we are in what he calls like a pathology of an entanglement of, I think it was like entanglement of I forget the term that he uses, but he was able to spot certain phenomena like that before like anybody. Like it was like the first time that like someone did like an analysis of Black poverty in the United States. However, his solutions of like how, like, not only the solutions, but like why did these things come to be in like the current, like in the current problem of poverty, were just off off by a mile. Like he cited among other things the idea of single mothers, in like, how do I say this, it was just bad. It was bad. It was just really, really bad. But the thing that I think could have been beneficial with somebody like Patrick Moynihan would be to spend more time in the research aspect of talking to more Black people about their conditions, instead of doing sort of like this top-down analysis, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense. I completely agree.
Yeah, it's like, instead of, and I guess to drive it home to people who are watching, it's not only theorizing about the people, but it's like, God damn it, I'm invoking Black Panther quotes. Not only theorizing about the people, but being part of the people. And sometimes that you have to do is that you have to insert yourself in these to the best of your ability. Like, you have to assert yourself into these spaces in order to just see what's going on. And this, I think, is something that I'm sure you might see from the state level. Because right now, New Jersey, as an example, like New Jersey is going through a gubernatorial election right now. And something that Jack Cattarelli, who is the Republican candidate, he's trying to involve himself in a lot of communities to see what those problems are. I don't think he's going to win, but I understand that, like, and he also understands that, like, I can't just be in the ivory tower analyzing the conditions of New Jerseyans and then just saying like, I think it's this way because of this, this, and this, because then it ends up with the outcome of like, that's not the case at all. But I think you agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, like, essentially what I'm hearing, I mean, like, this makes sense, right? Like, it's just to make sure that when we have larger, if we're talking about like difference between qualitative and quantitative data and trying to discern like larger societal trends, like it seems like a large point is to make sure that you actually include the perspectives of the people who are being studied when those things are being studied, when those analyses are being conducted. Because if you don't include them, then there could be certain questions or certain aspects of conducting that information collection in that data analysis that could end up being omitted, and that could end up creating an issue.
Yeah, and I guess to really like, I want to make sure I drive this point home as best I can. I guess you like we can do kind of a how do we say, like a little thought exercise here. I'm sure you're familiar with you're on Twitter, so I'm sure you know a lot about COINTELPRO.
Yeah,
But
gotcha.
so like, okay, so the question being like, who would you talk to or bring forth if you're part of a committee, like if you're part of the church commission or church committee, and you need to talk to people who were like who like are part of this infiltration of the FBI and all these other organizations. Who be on your list of people to talk to, in your opinion?
I don't know. You tell me.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say like for me, right? One place I would talk to is probably the people who would describe themselves as informants.
Hmm.
Because in one way, it's like, how do we know how bad this is, if not for our ability to talk? Like, again, what I'm trying to say is that one of the reasons why we know of how bad COINTELPRO is that we're able to and have stories of the, and we literally made a movie about it, where with Judas and the Black Messiah. Of we know how bad it is, or how bad and deep it was, because of the people who were in the within the FBI and these other organizations, and telling their story about their experience within there. So we use that we use to your point, like we use stories to help understand phenomena.
I mean, like,
And
in that instance, I mean, like the concern that I guess I have, like, are
right,
you familiar with like the concept of hearsay?
yes,
Yeah. So like there, I guess I worry about like there's a difference between using someone's statements of a matter of fact as proof of the
mm-hmm.
matter of the fact. There's a difference between that and using someone's statements to say that we should try to do better collection of facts, right?
Right.
Like those two things have meaningful difference to me. Like I can 100% get behind the idea that like, hey, these people say that like we conduct a study or we conduct like a broad analysis. There are people of the targeted group who say that's not reflective of their lived experience. So we should do better data collection, accounting for things that we may have missed. There's a difference between that and relying on the statements of those people as like evidence of the matters of the fact that they state,
Correct.
right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Because that's even something that we even see, if I'm keeping within the COINTELPRO example, that's even something that people use as sort of the dissenting, not necessarily the dissenting opinion, but as like a, well, these are just anecdotes. Like, how do we really know that they are, like, how do we really know that they're operatives? Like, they could just be saying this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next smoking gun is, well, we have data of the transactions.
Mm-hmm.
So why is this civilian getting money from us? It's like,
Right.
oh,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
like once you're able to bring that in, like now you're starting like then it's like okay, now we're not just relying on hearsay. Now it's like we have something more substantive to be able to go off
and
of.
that's the thing where I think people think that doesn't necessarily exist in CRT, where they think that, like, if I'm using the COINTELPRO example, it's just an informant saying what their experience is with his organization, and then nobody's challenging it. When in reality, like, there's stories are only predominantly used as reinforcement. But there's something to be very clear that there's also a use of science fiction. I guess it's like a sidebar. There's also the use of science fiction to prove a point. Are you, Derek Bell wrote something called The Space Invaders. There may have been a special. I don't really remember at this point. But basically, it's a short, it's a short story. Space Traders, excuse me. And the task that it proposes is that aliens come. I'm paraphrasing a story because I don't remember verbatim, but it's along these lines where
Okay.
aliens show up. Like, let me paint it this way. Sorry, like, you RGR, congratulations, you're the president of the United States,
Okay.
and aliens show up day one. You put your hand on the Bible, blah 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 blah. Everybody claps. Your family's in the front row crying. It's a great day. But then aliens show up. And they say, we are going to make sure that your country's economic and energy needs, all that stuff you have problems with are gone. You don't have to worry about them. but we just want all of your black people. And you have 24 hours to decide. So like all of your conditions in society are met, but we just want all of your black people. And in this case, to be clear, all black U.S. citizens.
Okay.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then like the sort of, how do I say this? The sort of moral that it gets to is that people will only like the argument that's kind of made here, kind of, at least with my interpretation of the story, was that the only, what Derek's trying to argue here within that, and this is now like 20 plus years old, like, or longer than that actually, the only time that progress within society happens is at the expense of the disenfranchised. So in a situation where if the president was offered, or in this case, like the president, even the government at large, was offered for their economic condition, economic, energy, like all those problems, environmental problems, solved at the expense of all black U.S. citizens, the government would take that trade.
I mean, like,
and that personally, I don't agree with that, by the way.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, obviously, that. I mean, like, I guess that the issue is that, just so that, well, there's like a couple things. So, well, what's the point of writing it? Because I would say, like, if I were in that position, I mean, like, this hopefully isn't just me like virtue signaling. Like, I think that like philosophically, I wouldn't do that because it would violate like it's the difference between like I just went on my own little arc about this, right? Like difference between like utilitarianism and like the, I don't know, maybe like the Kantian categorical imperative. I keep using that, so I feel like I'm probably misusing that right now. But basically that like, you know, the question, it's kind of like the trolley problem issue, right? Like, you know, if you could kill one person to save several, then would you do it? And the answer is probably not to, or at least the answer is probably like to not like that we probably don't want to sign off on like the taking of life just to be able to improve other people's lives, because like I don't know, it's kind of like the whole Thanos issue, right? I'm switching around, right? But it's like, you know, even if we took Thanos at good faith that like, oh, you know, like snap the universe, half of all people go away, but like life dramatically improves for everyone, we probably still wouldn't want to, because we want like the whole point is preserving human life.
Right.
You know, but I mean like, so that's kind of like I don't know, that we don't have to get like, that's like a more smaller point, but like I guess that my question is like why was that story then written? Because I mean like the issue is that like if it's to prove that that's what the government would do in that kind of a situation, it kind of like, I mean, it's kind of like begging the question where it's like, well, we don't actually know if that's what the government would do, you know?
Right. And that's even the question that I have with a lot of and this is the only critique. I have a few critiques. Obviously, I have a few critiques of CRT, but like one of the things that I worry about when certain scholars start dabbling in nonfiction to bring certain points home is that people will start thinking that, like, as you saw with AJW, like, oh, these stories are just these little magical anecdotes that are just like part of fantasy. You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
yeah.
Even and that sucks because it makes the arguments in support of it much harder. And
I mean, like you can use, I mean, like story, it like they can be fine. Like, you know, we use stories or hypotheticals and like teaching the law and teaching like philosophy all the time. It's just like, I guess that like it's important for me to ask like, why is it being offered? Because in that instance, like if the story is being offered to show that like that's what the government would do in that situation, well, I mean, we don't really know if that's to be the case. We could make an argument that that's likely what they're going to do, but we don't know that with certainty, you know?
Yeah, and even like this class, like it's crazy. I don't say it's crazy, but it's like a lot of like, because I read this in college, and then like what we're talking about right now, split a room, where, because I think something that I think these things would, which is why I think, by the way, my brain is wandering a little bit, is that I think for some aspects of CRT and like what people think CRT is, I think should only exist within undergraduate and graduate education, where having sort of like a meta-analysis about people being put in a position that, like I described within the Space Traders short story, I don't think it would be it would lead to the best, not necessarily educational outcomes, but I don't trust these conservative states. Okay, like I
Sure.
feel like
I do think that absolutely a lot of people are like over like misrepresenting what it is so that they could effectively legislate the teaching of any racist history out of K through 12 education. I completely agree that seems to be the case, right? I just also want to have like a decent understanding of what it is so that I can be able to have like a firm stance on like where should it be taught, if anywhere.
Right. And that's even the thing that I think when it comes to implementation, I'm sure you agree here, where there are some parts of, if I'm thinking in terms of like critical law or critical theory, like there's some things that you could definitely teach in a high school level. There are definitely things you can teach at an undergraduate level. But then when you start getting to K through 5 and 5 or 6 through 8, then things get a little like weird. Maybe weird's not the best word, but I think people think that like people are gonna like make these like do certain like privilege checklist things when they're in 4th grade or something, and it's like, hang on, like curriculum still has progressions, and the adoption of whether it be ethnic studies or certain levels of like basic sociology, it's not going to start in like 3rd or 4th grade. You know, my point is that like education is still going to have like certain progressions, and people are going to create curriculum that's still not only culturally and socially sensitive, but also age appropriate. I don't know if I cut out on the last part.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So to what extent, I guess I'm trying to figure out. So like, to what extent do you, and if you don't know this, then you don't, then so like so how have like states and schools been trying to implement it, if at all, as far as like teaching it at a K through 12 level? Has that been happening at all? And like, and how has it been? Or I guess that's kind of saying, yeah. So like the first question is like, how has it been implemented, if at all, or is it being implemented, and how, if at all? There you go.
Yeah. So I can only speak for Jersey, right? I haven't seen it.
Okay.
I what I have seen is this: like there is cultural sensitivity training within like my education for teaching modules. So every year we're supposed to go through these modules, which are just educational programs that haven't changed in 5 years. It's the same thing. Like this is, and they're really not cringe, but they're just very like surface level. Like these are what people mean when they talk about pronouns. These are the type of pronouns that are observable. And then like the explanation, and but within that, right, if I'm using pronouns as an example, there's also like certain things that you have to bring into consideration with pronouns. As one example, like you can't disclose, like, how do I say this? Currently, how things are structured, there isn't a lot of guidance in terms of teachers asking students their preferred pronouns, or even their I would say adopted name. That's a bad way of describing it, but the name that they assert themselves to be. Like, I have a lot of students who have their gender assigned at birth listed on the roster. I have their dead name on the roster. And then I have the awful job as the substitute teacher going up there and saying the dead name in front of a group of people, where there's a group acceptance that the dead name doesn't exist. Or the dead name is dead, I should say. And every time that happens, it sucks. And because then it looks bad, right? Where it's like, that's my dead name. My name is actually this. It's like, okay, great. Thank you. I wish I didn't have to deal with this, and there was better ways of giving students agency. But that's what people, I guess, are I don't want to say against, but that's really the education that happens. It's just like there's levels of cultural sensitivity and social sensitivity, and how we interact with that and certain type of pitfalls that exist, especially when it comes with race and stuff like that. That's the only thing I've run into. Like we've had an updated cultural sensitivity module where it used to be like a 7-minute module. Now I think it's like 30 minutes, 35 minutes that talks about, unironically, AAVE and the acknowledgement of dialects. Like we have a module now about dialects and like different types of vernaculars that students might come into, which I would argue are fine. Question mark.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, the way that AJW was framing it during the debate was that people were teaching that as a stand-in for teaching, like, you know, like standard English or what, you know, like what children are normally taught in schools. That, like, as if people are being taught that instead of, you know, like standardized English or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and even my one colleague at the high school, he's an English teacher, and he talks about this very thing where there are students who use their casual speech in academic writing. And then the question, and I guess like the teaching question is like, how do we maintain that student's like identity in their own language without policing what they can say? You know what I mean? Or rather, like, there's a way that you could speak, or or not saying the way you could, but the way that you speak when you're talking in a chat room or a Discord stream chat, or to like a person in like in a bar or restaurant. But then if you're writing a paper about something, there's different things that you have to do and different formatting and different things that you have to do, and that's fine in my opinion. However, there's not a lot of education around how to talk about that to students, where it's not necessarily a correct way, quote unquote, but if you're trying to do something in MLA format, then there's MLA format, you know, like there's no, and then even like there's like certain ways that you can write certain papers, and we're not trying, and people aren't trying to say that like we should have books in AAVE or Ebonics, quote unquote. Like we're just saying that like this is how students talk, this is how students may write, so be prepared. And sometimes what you might do, which my colleague has done, is that you might have a paper that is all in all exactly what the prompt is asking to do, but is in a more casual form of language. And then the question is like, do you fail a student if they did the prompt, but they just use vernacular that they're familiar with? You know? Like, I would argue that that's not my jurisdiction. I'm a music teacher. So.
Right. I mean, like, as far as the law would go, we probably would, like, I don't, like, if we're talking about, like, teaching in the law, like, maybe this is a distinction for teaching this at the graduate versus, like, K through 12 format, right? Legal writing is very particular, right? Like, and I don't know, it kind of, like, permeates into the way that I speak and the way that I convey ideas, right? Is that, like, they teach you to be able to speak as clearly and concisely as possible, in as reasonably, well, I mean, as clearly and concisely as possible, using as little space, I guess, as much as you can, right? Basically, like, you know, you want to be very you want to be able to convey what you're trying to get at. I know I'm actually doing a very bad job of demonstrating this right now. But you want to be able to like convey ideas to people effectively, I guess is the best way to put it. And the way that you write is going to affect that, right? And so like if you use unclear language or language which is unfamiliar to other people, then that's going to be harder. Now that can kind of like cut both ways here, right? Because you can make an argument. You can make a reasonable argument that, you know, if you're trying to reach people who speaking dialects that are dissimilar to yours, and it could be good to be able to know how to convey those ideas in a way that's accessible to them, right? But at the same time, it's also like most people within the legal profession, for the large part, kind of like write very similarly, right? Like there's such a thing as called like blue booking, right? Which is the way that it's a universal form of citation for all legal analysis. And everyone is taught how to do it the exact same, right? Like to the point where, you know, you should be able to like I could pack up my bags and go and and move to California. And if I pass the bar there, then, you know, people who hire me should be able to expect the same kind of work that I put out as people who I work for here in Baltimore, right? And so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, and something that I think people, I guess, get lost. I don't know how to, the best way I can describe it. My one friend, I'm gonna name drop him. He's Tyreek. He got his JD when he was 23, 24. Like, he finished mad early, and he's like, he is hood as fuck. And the way that he talks and the way that he writes is not the same thing. Like, and the way that I try to explain it to people, where he will give you a really fantastic analysis of, say, like a social issue or something like that in written form, or even just like I've seen his doctoral thesis. It's amazing. But then when you talk to him, even in his casual speak, he's just like, "Yo, what's up, cuz?" Like, he's from Trenton. He's from my capital, and he's from the hood. His whole family, and but the thing is that, like, when you look at him from a casual perspective, like, he didn't really adopt the same type of how you would say academia. He's not academia, and he makes that very, very clear. Like, he has his it's so stupid. He has his it's like his diplomas are just sitting in his room, and I asked him one time, like, why don't you hang these? He's like, man, these just pieces of paper. And it's like, I mean, true, but
Interesting.
And this is a man, like again, like, he's incredibly bright, but again, like, in terms of, as McCheese brings up, is that he's able to, like, he understands that, like, because he brings it up to me a lot. It's like the way that as he says it very bluntly, like, the way that I talk to white people has to be different than the way I talk to black people. And like, do I like it? No, it's just how it is. He says it in a much more charged way than I'm saying right now, but generally speaking, I think, like, there's this idea that sometimes the people have to completely abandon who they are and, like, to quote unquote learn proper English. It's like, hang on, like, it's possible for you to maintain who you are, and then in certain settings, like, just readjust how you talk to people or how you write. And is that something that I think we should do all the time? I think from case to case, right? Like, the way that I think I talk to a parent has to be different than the way that I talk to a student about the exact same issue. And that's something I think we do all the time. But yeah, I'm ranting a little bit because, like, some of that man's claims were incredible.
Yeah. So go ahead and tell me. I think I understand what you're saying. So tell me, like, to summarize, because we've been talking for a bit. We talked a little bit about some issues that you had with things that Sean said. Are there any other issues that you had that haven't been brought up already?
Yeah, I think that if I'm pinning it to things that I think, if you were put in a situation that you could do better, and again, I don't have the perfect.
Oh yeah,
I don't
and
think
also
any of us have the perfect sauce.
Yeah, and also obviously for me, you're right. Like, I'm saying, like, obviously if there are ways that I could improve or I didn't accurately represent things, then feel free to tear me a new one.
Yeah. Like, something that I think sometimes, and I see it happen on panels a lot, mind you, or discussion. I don't know what the fuck these things are anymore. We get into a situation where somebody says something ridiculous, And I think we're always posed to the question, what can we let go and what can we pin down? And I think sometimes we run into the trap of people say so much that's so wrong that we have this desire to pinpoint not necessarily everything, but try to encapsulate what we're going to say to cover all of those things. I think somebody like Sean, and maybe dissenting opinions, I think you do a good job at very gently saying the same thing in a different way to try to get the answer. And I think sometimes you let people run away. And I think you could just lasso up.
Like, right. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I don't know, like here, with Sean, the big problem that I had is that, like, I didn't realize this as much until after the fact, but I mean, like, I didn't go into the conversation anticipating to be dealing with, like, a bad faith actor. Or at least that wasn't the way, that wasn't, like, the mindset I approached the conversation with. In hindsight, I absolutely should. You know, like, I should have approached the conversation assuming that, like, you know, even if I try to be as reasonable as possible, that he's not going to extend my position's charitability. So I had to, so that would, like, justify a different mindset with approaching that conversation. I mean, like, I don't really, I try to have conversations on my channel, kind of like, you know, what we're doing right now, right? Where it's like, I know that I don't have to be concerned about that with you, right? Like, I know that, like, you're going to extend my position's charitability, that you aren't acting in bad faith. Like, I don't have to, like, you know, make the conversation in my mind more about, like, showing the audience that you're a bad faith actor, rather than just, you know, have a conversation on the subject matter, which is what I'm more interested in anyway. But, like, yeah, it's just, I know that I, like, in hindsight, I should have been a lot firmer. I guess it was a combination of, like, I didn't go in with that kind of mentality, and also the fact that, I don't know, it was just, like, an awkward setup because, like, it was essentially like a 2-on-1. And it was just, like, this is the hard part with, like, both me and Destiny, is that we're both way too charitable to people. We're way more charitable to people who have contrary positions. You know, like, we will sit there and actually go through the arguments that he gives us, you know, even though he won't actually return that favor.
Something that I think might work, which I'm starting to do more now, because I forget who told me this. Somebody said this to me, and I wish I remembered which content creator or which chatter told me this. And it sounds kind of blunt, but sometimes you gotta let motherfuckers die on their own hills. I think something that we could do with that is not necessarily, like, basically dancing with them, you know? The best way I can describe it is, I don't want to say acknowledge that what they're saying might be true, but just let them dance. And then every once in a while, they skip a step, just be like, well, why'd you skip your step there?
Right. I mean, I kind of tried to do that.
Right.
You know, like, there are, like, I felt like the battles I picked were the right ones to pick. It's just that, like, I delivered it. I don't know. Like, I should have been a lot harsher with, like, the way that conversation should have gone down. Either should have had, like, someone like you or someone like Vosh, where, you know, you're a lot more focused on actually trying to expose the fact that they're a bad faith actor rather than actually just, you know, engaging with the merits of the discussion, right?
Something that I believe, just to make my point clear, kind of how I navigate in discussions now, is that I've been on this weird evolution for the past year and a half, or however long I've been on Twitch, and something that I'm realizing is that I don't necessarily think people believe what they say the first time they open their mouths. So it's almost like, okay, what is the actual belief here, and what question can I ask to lead to that belief, and maybe, or even acknowledge the hypocrisy of the claim. Like, as an example, I wrote it down, actually. Sean said, and you're going to probably run this when you watch it, Sean said, lived experiences are not shared across all demographics. Yeah, I can understand that premise, but we were talking about an academic discipline, and we need to verify, check, and there needs to be scrutiny. And then it's like, hang on. Like, do you understand the premise, or do you believe the premise to be true?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, that's what he said. So, like, he said, because Destiny talked about, or you said like it's not the rule that white people cannot talk about this, but it's rather recognizing some people do not have the shared experience of people of color, and they're less likely to understand those kind of experiences. And then Sean says, like, you're saying that lived experiences are not shared across all demographics, and then he just says and relinquishes, like, yeah, I could understand that premise, and then my brain goes like, wait, what? Because for me, understanding a premise is not the same as agreeing with it. And if we're trying to talk about CRT and we're talking about making sure that people like Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color's voices and experiences are brought up when we're talking about these interactions, that's like an important part of this. So you can't just kind of like, I guess you could say, like, what's the word? Brush off.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I can understand that premise. Like wait a minute. Like, this is like, and that's where I think, and again, like, I'm only saying this when in real time, I don't think it was possible for you to do that. But I think something that we can do is when we are like in a discussion and there's like a definite type of frameworks that we're working off of, like basically establish the frameworks, and then anytime somebody deviates from it, be like, hang on, we agreed that we're going this way, so let's basically stay on course. Because something that I think people of dissenters do is that they want to try to, when they're like pinned into a corner, and Sean does this a lot when you watch this, when he's pinned in a corner, he caters to authority. And he caters to authority of saying like, well, this is what these scholars say. And it's like, okay, how am I, like, what? Like, if this is what these scholars say, then we're supposed to just accept that? Like, what do we, like, what?
Can I ask you 2 more questions on that?
Yeah.
So A, are those scholars, like, was he accurate in his representation of those scholars' works? And B, is that like, he would cite them as like, oh, well, they're foundational authors, so therefore they're representative of what CRT is. Does that statement have merit to it? Like, A, was his representation of their work accurate, and B, is that representative of what CRT is now?
Oh, absolutely not. One thing that he tried to do, I applaud you. I gave you, like, if I would give you many back scratchies on this one.
I appreciate it.
He tried to bring up Regina Austin, and he just said shit to this. I have been trying to find evidence to his claim. I still can't find it.
Which claim in particular?
So, he said, oh, I wrote it down. Or is it? There we go. Brain rot alert. He brought up Regina Austin, and he said that, like, she thinks that O.J. Simpson, Clarence Thomas, Malcolm X, Marion Barry, Coors Brewing Company, and Church's Frederican or something were all subject of anti-Black conspiracy theories. And then, like, I looked to the best of my ability of all information that was publicly available and couldn't find it. And then he says, and then she got called out for saying that AIDS was created by the U.S. government. And then I'm like, okay, if somebody from a university, especially a law school, says something ridiculous, there's probably going to be a story about it.
The implication. So you looked for one and there wasn't one.
Yeah. So I literally, like, because basically what I do now, what I did for the notes that for what I could, so I could give you like some things to think about. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find anything.
So Mary McCheese in chat, and this is something I want to look into. So
yeah.
If Joe wants to find out where he got that, Sean copied that word for word from the doc posted in research. There's like some kind of publication. McCheese,
Gotcha.
if you want to elaborate more, actually, if you want to, you can join the waiting room and I'll bring you into the call. Or, oh yeah, scholarship. All right, here, page 701. Scholarship.law.cornell.edu. What's wrong with critical race theory? Reopening the case for middle-class values. And then page 701. Let's see. Let's see where. Oh, too far. 711. 709.
There we go. Okay. What?
Say right here. 701. Culture complaint. The focus of victimization, not surprisingly, has led critical race to anti-Black conspiracies. We live in conspiratorial times. Almost everyone has a favorite conspiracy theory or two. Black espouses more than their proportionate share of such theories. Regina Austin lists Regina Austin lists O.J. Simpson, Clarence Thomas, Malcolm X, Marion Barry, Coors Brewing Company, and Church's Chicken as subjects of anti-Black conspiracy theories. Oh my God, it's literally word for word. But it's broader, more amorphous. But it is the broader, more amorphous, and thus more insidious conspiracies that primarily capture her attention. For instance, wait a second, hold on. Where's the citation for this?
Yeah, and then what?
Wait a second, hold on. Where's the site? So, all right, so this is where it comes from. Specifically developed to ravage African peoples or resulted from uncontrolled biological experiments conducted by the U.S. government. Citation 96. So it came from Regina Austin, Beyond Black Demons and White Devils, Anti-Black Conspiracy Theories in Black Public Sphere. So that's where they're saying that this came from. Wait, 95. Okay, so that's... If you want me to join the call, I can. Sure, hold on.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Something, just to be clear, as Mayor McCheese gets kind of set up, something that I notice in a lot of the research, and maybe they can elaborate on this a bit more, is it's something that I started noticing was there's like something that somebody says, and then there's more nuance to what that is. You know what I mean?
Hey, what's happening?
How we doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Oh my god. When I found this document, I was so happy because I went over your debate, right? And literally everything, like 90% of what Sean said is word for word out of this document. Like,
really?
He didn't even think for himself. He just read word for word what is out of here. Like, he does it with when he brings up the rooster's egg, like, all the time.
Yeah.
All of that was straight from this document as well. There was the two examples he used. He used the adoption example and the book example of going into a bookshop or something, or dolls, sorry. Both of those he just read that from the document.
Oh, that's great. So, I mean, like, is there any validity to those arguments though? Like, is what I'm wondering.
So, I posted in the research channel. I did like an Excel thing, and I tried to traffic light his claims. So the thing that I found with Sean is that, and I think Joe would agree, is that he'll make claims that are based in truths. So, for example, he'll appeal to the scholars quite heavily, but from what I see from lack of reading around the subject, he mischaracterizes what these scholars are actually saying. So, for example, with Austin, he talked a lot about how Austin was peddling conspiracy theories. In particular, he brought up the idea of the AIDS conspiracy theory, and the idea of spiritual truths. So, in actual fact, Austin, in her book, I went off his source and then some of Austin's primary sources here. She never actually promotes conspiracy theories. She never actually ever does that. What she does is she says there is certain knowledge to be gained from why certain communities peddle these conspiracy theories. In particular, why anti-Black conspiracy theories are so popular in society. And from those, we can find what she terms spiritual truths. So whilst these conspiracy theories may not be true, within them, we can understand certain aspects from these communities that are peddling these conspiracies.
As to reinforce this thought, I'm going to use COINTELPRO as an example. We know historically and factually that there were informants within the Black Panther Party. How many informants were there? We don't know. But we do know the FBI worked alongside many other civilians and to infiltrate these civil rights organizations. We know that much to be true. So now, like what we see on Twitter, right, is that anytime you see like you'll see like this is a CIA account meme, you know, and like my brain goes, oh, because there's apprehension of people in certain movements, then there's that connection of like, okay, like if this person's acting even remotely kind of sus or out of nowhere, then it must be a CIA account. It must be an informant, because why would somebody act an X or Y way, even though there's no evidence to support that claim? And that's just like, it's like, just because like one thing is true, that there were informants in civil rights organizations, doesn't mean that it's true across all cases. Like there would need to be more information to understand that. But we can understand, like to your point, McChee, like we can understand like, okay, this is where this comes from.
And this is where the damage comes from having, and I'll be quite critical of these panels in general, is that when people don't completely understand the knowledge that they're talking about, and I'll be the first to admit, like, I don't know everything about critical race theory, but from what it seems like, he's taken everything from one document. So that article quotes Austin completely out of context. And if you were to just read that article, I would completely understand why Sean came to the conclusion that Austin peddles conspiracy theories. But if you were to take her article on page 1025, she actually says, on the topic of conspiracy theories, she'll always detail it by saying some narratives posit. She never actually claims a normative claim herself. I'll post her article somewhere.
Yeah,
and that's even when he was to more broadly speaking, the idea of maybe did we talk about this, Riley? The idea of like integration versus separatism.
I think that we talked about it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So like one of the problems that within the core of Black separatism, which broadly speaking is just one branch of Black nationalism, is that you saw sort of two camps that arose during the early stages of civil rights, which were integrationalist movements and separatist movements. And both of these movements had their own share of problems. And one thing that people who were part of like the separatist route, they argued like, how are we supposed to, like I mentioned before, how do we integrate into a system that wasn't designed for us? And the people who are in power don't want us to be in there in the first place. But then there's an acknowledgement on the integrationalist side of we must work together if we're going to solve these problems. Like it's the only way, it's the only path forward. And then what happens is like it very easily leads to like integration bad. And it's like, hang on, like no one who posits that, whether it be like Derek Bell, whether it be Kimberly Crenshaw, Mary Matsuda, all these individuals, they don't like say integration is bad. They say that like usually they say that integration leads to its own set of problems and questions that you have to answer in the forefront before you move forward.
Okay.
Because of the history of certain movements and stuff like that. And that's oversimplifying, by the way.
No, but I mean, like so essentially it sounds like a distinction between like a prescriptivist and a descriptivist approach, right? Like you're able to descriptively discuss some of these things and like acknowledge that, like, listen, like historically, this is what happens when you have integration, and not like make a prescriptivist claim based on that description of just, you know, what generally happens. Yeah.
And to give a little history, right? Like Booker T. Washington was a separatist. He felt that through the what's called now the Louisiana Compromise, Atlanta Compromise. Basically, like, listen, white people, leave us alone to our own things, and just leave us to our own devices, and we'll prosper. But the problem is that he worked extensively with white elites and quite literally the Klan in order to see about his vision. So even in a situation where he's like, I want to be separate from this system altogether and just leave us to our own devices, he still needed to cooperate with the system in place in order to see his means. But then unironically, like, he was very critical of the NAACP. And it's like, hang on, like, how can you be critical of the NAACP for being integrationalist when you in fact work with white people? You know what I mean? Yeah.
I think a lot of his talk about integration was conflated with, I think you also talked about it earlier, Joe, he kept calling it Ebonics, right? And like it's
Destiny corrected him, and he just said it again.
Yeah, can we unpack
term,
that a little
right?
bit? Like, what was going on there?
What was that?
Like, yeah, can we unpack that a little bit? Like, what was the? I'm sorry. Like, can we just like go over like what was going on there?
I think sometimes what happens is people say certain things, and dogs start barking, and then when they start talking again, the dogs just keep getting louder, and then we're just sitting there on the outside going, "How do these dogs keep Oh, I'm saying he was probably dog whistling, maybe not directly, right? Like if I believe that, maybe some like it felt when he was talking about that like an inherent dog whistle, and this idea that like there's a proper way to speak English without clearly defining what proper English means. Like,
right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense because I was like a little bit lost. All right, so the dog whistle went over my head because like my immediate thinking was, wait, there's no like there's no correct way to be able to teach English. We probably want to teach everyone like the same core language so that everyone can be able to communicate in society. But like if we want to teach other dialects, and like that's where my brain was going. The dog whistle just went clear over my head.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like I don't think sometimes maybe she's can elaborate on this a little bit. Is that I don't necessarily think that. Actually, let me rephrase that. There are two groups of people. There are people who clearly are dog whistling to hide their power level, and then there are people who their words lead to that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and this is it's something that I'm so confused about when it comes to Sean, is that I don't know whether he's doing it deliberately or whether it's just a case of he doesn't know what he's talking about completely, and so he sometimes trips over himself. Because like when you're talking about the issue of integration and language, again, he's mischaracterizing what Peller is saying. And like one of Peller's quotes is, knowledge is itself a function of the powerful to impose their own views. And that idea is basically the notion of, well, yes, there's nothing deliberately wrong with teaching everyone, say, quote unquote, an American English, but we have to recognize that when we teach everyone one uniform language, there is an element of status implications inferred on that. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't teach them that language, but we should just recognize that there are complexities to doing that.
And to reinforce that, right? Like people talk about black sounding names, and it's like, well, this is a black sounding name. Just name somebody just normally. And it's like, that's what happens when you don't teach slaves English. Huh. Weird how that works. So
like the idea that like, that certain names can become like quote unquote not normal.
Yeah. And even within that, like there's just I live in a state that argues over a breakfast sandwich. So it's like, is it pork roll or is it Taylor ham? The main ingredient of Taylor ham is pork roll. But like we accept that like language is kind of fluid, where like one word might mean something totally different in another part of the country, but there's no uniformity. Maybe for things like chair or ball, but
okay, that makes a lot of sense. So and I know McCheese, so you went through Sean's claim, so like was there anything else that stood out? I'm just trying to like because right now the conversation is getting on pretty long, which I mean like it's been productive, but just since I've already got you here, like are there any other things that really jumped out at you that is worth bringing up at this point? I mean, like we'll be reviewing the discussion later, so if not, we can just go over it as it comes, but
let me think. Oh, there was one that I found somewhat interesting, and it was a back and forth he had with Destiny when Destiny brought up the 1619 project. I think it was Destiny that brought it up. And Sean tried to claim that CRT had absolutely no influence on the 1619 project. I thought that was somewhat odd. I just don't understand how he could see that. Which could be something you could go into later if you wanted.
Right.
And the other example, which I would classify as him being categorically wrong on, is this point he kept bringing up in relation to CRT is against forms of scrutiny, and it isn't scrutinized by anyone. It's sort of this insular field that cannot be scrutinized by anyone. And again, he showed his ability, his lack of the field, as it were, because he kept bringing up peer review when that isn't what criticism is about. That's not what peer review really means. But that was something that I found rather strange, because CRT is heavily criticized both within its own field and outside its field. So, like, I know
they
Joe
don't even agree with each other.
Yeah, this is the thing. The reason why CRT is so hard to define is because so many CRT scholars disagree with each other. Like, you saw this yourself, Riley, when you were coming up against some scholars that were quite heavily anti-capitalist in their approach to CRT. Not all CRT scholars are anti-capitalist, and not all of them are anti-liberal either. It just so happens that along the post-colonial trend of CRT scholars, that tends to be what's brought up. But I think you read a few days ago the idea of like the radical liberal tradition of CRT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that you sent that to me.
And even within, like I mentioned, if I'm doing a sort of one-to-one, not one-to-one comparison, but within certain movements, like say like the Black Panther Party, right? Like the way that Bobby Seale wanted to approach like how to navigate within like a social movement and politics is very different from the way that Huey Newton approached it. And these are two people who founded the party. And so like it's very common for people who are studying or even within a group won't agree fundamentally on it. Like we accept this pretty much universally asterisk when it comes to like most things, I would say, where there's not a group chat of CRT scholars talking about these things. Some of them studied off like and if I'm thinking of Crenshaw as an example, like her students ended up being scholars themselves, and they had different analysis because they were teachers. Like it started out as like a educational movement, and then those people were like, it's passed. I'm trying to say it's just passed down knowledge, and it's very likely and shown that these people don't agree with each other.
Oh, actually, I've got a really on the scrutiny topic. Actually, I've got one really funny thing that I found out. So the article that he mainly uses is one by I think it's Subotnick. He pronounced the name. Subotnick actually wrote a book on this matter, fleshing it out. And ironically enough, one of the people on the dust covers that reviewed that book was Richard Delgado. Delgado being the person that Sean in the video, or in the debate, criticized as being a radical anti-free speech CRT scholar, etc., etc. Delgado's review of Sputnik is incredibly positive. And I think that quote alone goes against this idea that CRT scholars are against all forms of criticism, because the quote itself, it states that the left should be more open to these forms of criticism of CRT, and we need to be able to answer these criticisms.
That's actually really interesting. Huh. And I guess it also goes to demonstrate. So like that kind of serves two purposes there, right? It shows that like, like actually not only is criticism normalized in the field, but like, it's encouraged, right? That like, even among the people who Sean would say are like super anti-free speech, anti-criticism, that like, like they've actually gone out and praised some of the most harsh criticisms against like the field of thought. And also kind of demonstrates that Sean isn't really all that familiar with the subject matter outside of one publication.
Definitely. But I don't want to vilify him too much. Okay. In that, like, there's a lot of criticisms for sure that you can level against him.
Okay.
And of course, we brought up the idea of we don't know whether he's dog whistling or not. I'm not sure, but to give him some validity, and this isn't just applied to CRT in general, but there are scholars that are out there that do engage in perhaps not the greatest behavior But the importance is not to do what Sean does by focusing on the scholars. Focus on their work and their claims made within their work, because scholars are just human people like everyone else. They can be shitty. Quite a lot of them, in fact, are. They have god complexes. They do live in ivory towers. It is a real thing. But the claims that they make, for the most part, are found to be robust. And that's what we should focus on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, like, that was why, especially when he brought up the individual scholars, why I was really trying to focus on. I mean, like, I brought this up multiple times, right? Like, the idea of, like, you know, if there's one individual scholar that has, like, that has done problematic things, you know, I just kind of, like, because I wasn't as familiar with it, I just kind of stipulated, like, all right, even if we accept that to be true, that probably isn't grounds to throw out the entire field because of what one person says. You know, we probably want to focus more on, like, the robust ideas that, you know, comprise whatever this field of thought is, you know?
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying, like, I really liked how you did it like 3 or 4 times, where you like directly asked him, what do you think are the core tenets of CRT? Let's move away from the boogeyman that is CRT and the scholars. Let's talk about what you disagree with. And every time you asked him that question, he would come back with, what is this debate supposed to be about? I thought we were talking about this. You don't obviously understand the topic. And it was very frustrating to watch. I don't know how it was for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was frustrating, but I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to be nice right now. I'm on my nice arc.
Yeah.
Well, I think something as a thought of that, where it's, you want to have a conversation in a way that leads to sort of productive outcomes. But at the same time, if you or we as panelists don't accept a framework to discuss the topic around, then it's just attacking straws and ad homing, and for me, calling people white. So it's like there's like kind of basically, in a way, it's almost like, okay, let's build this sandcastle so we can play in it. And it might not, the sandcastle might not even be everything that we want to play when it comes to playing in the sand. But for now, because we only have a finite amount of time, let's do that. And he was trying to do that without building a castle. Like, he wanted to like bring in toys to play without having something to play in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If that makes any type of sense.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It was just frustrating, and it's making me reevaluate kind of like, you know, the kind of people I want to be able to engage with, because obviously, like, I want to continue engaging with people in these kind of conversations, and including people who I disagree with, especially people who I disagree with, right? Yeah. It's just a matter of like figuring out exactly like how to do that without, because, you know, like, I would like to be able to have my conversations where I can take people in good faith, assuming that they're familiar with the literature. If they haven't, that they'll acknowledge what they have and take other people in good faith. You know, I don't want people misrepresenting things to me when I'm, you know, trying to have like a good faith conversation with them.
Right. And that's even the problem that comes up. I don't remember if it did. Maybe it did. I'm mixing up my panels. I don't know. Like, one thing that people tend to extrapolate, I don't know if the word extrapolate, but they start roping in whiteness studies within CRT and start invoking the name of Robin DiAngelo. And it's, I'm officially calling it the Robin DiAngelo effect, where people will take a singular piece of text from a larger field of observation and then use that criticized text as the core of their dissent. And that to me, and what's weird about it is that you would think that would happen with CRT, right? Like, you would think that there would be like a particular, like a very direct book that people are against. But what's weird is that people attack the people with, and maybe McShee's can elaborate on this a little bit, where it feels like they're attacking the individual and not really any particular direct text or body of work.
Yeah, and I mean, I've just realized you've been calling me McCheese. You can call me Scott, by the way.
Oh, awesome! Glad to meet you, Scott.
You can call me whatever you want, Joe. Yeah, I think this is interesting for CRT in particular because of how contemporary the field is, where you have scholars that are still alive to this day, like the fathers and mothers of this subfield. They're still alive for the most part. Whereas you don't see this happening as much with other fields. For example, there was a lot personally wrong with Marx and his personal views and things like that, but you don't see them brought up as much, for example, if we're talking about that. But then again, I also think that because it is a topic on race, I would say that people probably are more they feel like they can criticize these scholars. I think there is an element of power dynamics at play here, where they think that they are allowed to just shit on these people because they don't value the subject at all being studied.
Yeah, and we kind of see that with Ibram Kendi, right? Where Ibram Kendi's works are, I use them. Like, Stamped from the Beginning is an amazing book. But what happens is people, because maybe Twitter's to blame, asterisk and 30 pages of fine print, where these people are still accessible. So they're not only like their plaques are not only in the ivory castle, but they're also living in the castle itself. So like when you kick down the Marxism door, and it's like, I want to talk to Marx, and it's like, well, he's dead. Here's 5,000 Twitter accounts in their defense. I don't know if that point makes any sense. Where it's like it's an interesting phenomenon where like we're living in an era where we're watching a studies around race, and not only race as a social construct, but race and like the history of race and what it led to be. Like we're seeing these things analyzed and critiqued in real time, which is kind of cool in a way. When you think about it, like
it's cool, but I appreciate like a 90% reduction in the racism that follows with it, especially when you're talking about like criticizing black scholars. It reminds me of a similar, like the birth of, say, the new gender revival in scholarly work, like with Butler coming in like a wrecking ball in terms of gender studies. The critiques that oh my god, they received so much, and they still do, because of their theories, but also in part I think because they weren't that traditional the mold of what a scholar ought to be for a lot of people. I think it does make people more susceptible to those types of hatred.
And also it's okay, I mean this in the I how do I say this? It feels like sometimes people want to find reasons to debunk and discredit certain studies and analysis of phenomena. And when they find out that the individuals who are analyzing it are members of that very group that is alleging to be disenfranchised, they just go harder on the paint. I don't know how to word this thought properly.
So basically,
it's like,
I mean, like if I want to steal man, like this is like super duper hard steel man, because like part of it, like I think that absolutely a big part of that motivation is going to be in I think that a really big part of the motivation is going to be in terms of like bias, right, or manifesting bias. It's like, oh, not only is this like a sensitive subject, but the people who are talking about it are the group that I'm like biased against, right? Like I think that there is a part of that. If I want to be super duper steel manny, there could be a concern that like, oh, you have a group that's talking about itself. There could be a conflict of interest there where they might be more charitable to themselves, or they might give themselves an answer that's not necessarily representative of reality, right? This is a really big conservative talking point where it's like, when people like, this is a big reason. I'm kind of giving this example as I'm thinking about it, but this is like, I could imagine a lot of conservatives who would make this argument that like, this is the reason why a lot of, surveys of people who are in poverty as far as like the things that contribute to their lived conditions probably cannot be trusted, because a lot of people who live in poverty are going to give answers which are going to lead most likely to like a stronger welfare state, right? Now, I would disagree with that. I think that there are researchers who take like reasonable efforts to make sure that those kinds of responses can't be like tainted by bias, or they like reasonably try to and do account for those kind of things. But like that's like if we're talking about like trying to convince people who are already starting from a position of disagreement, that's probably what a lot of them are thinking is like, oh, there are people who are writing on this and they're also the group that's being studied. What the hell is up with that? That seems like a weird conflict of interest. Does that make sense?
Yes. Because even Sean brings that up. Oh, it's cool, man. Sean brings that up in his own arguments, where he kept saying like they would, and like they say these things and they just want to make like every excuse to not, I forget what it was. He invoked something about like Black people just making excuses for all of their behavior, or trying to excuse all Black behavior. It was yikes. I wrote it down somewhere.
He defined that as one of the core tenets of critical race theory. I'm pretty sure I got the quote here.
Yep, I remember that. Yeah, absolutely yikes. But yeah, like that's, I think that's representative. Now again, like it's hard to tell whether or not like that's as like a consequence of his own genuine beliefs, or if he's representing what he thinks would most resonate with his audience. But I think that,
yes,
you know, one of those things is either he believes that genuinely, or he knows that's what a conservative audience would believe, right?
Correct. Like I found the quote, by the way. It's a part of CRT is excusing negative behaviors from the Black community. Whatever behavior you could possibly find is excused by critical race theory.
By the way, is there any truth to that at all? We haven't talked about it. Is there literally any iota of truth to that at all?
There's nothing.
Like, where does that come from? What is
that's?
Why?
I wish I want to like the way that I describe it, like the way that the analogy that I give is that when a comet comes crashing and everything explodes, I want to look at Destiny and be like, you say the M-word in private, right? And it just goes all the time. It's like, okay. Where like I just want to like sit some people down and be like, do you believe what you just said? Or I'm memeing there of Destiny, by the way. But it's like I just want to like sit the person down and be like, is this what you actually believe? Like, where did this come from?
So I think, if I'm being very, very charitable to what he is saying here, I think, again, this is him mischaracterizing something that Austin says. So in Austin's work, they look at the ideas of crime within certain Black communities and non-conforming behavior within minority communities. And now, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't completely read all of Austin's works, so I could be mischaracterizing them slightly. But the idea is that, again, there is some subjective truth to be gained out of this, and there's some there's some value in promoting forms of that behavior. And I think that is where he's pulling this idea of excusing minority behavior from.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to be clear, it's not excusing that behavior. It's just trying to descriptively analyze it and see what there's.
I think so. Yeah. So when we're talking about, say, we have like all over America, we have impoverished areas that are ethnically segregated, and there are large. Actually, we'll use a movie example. Actually, no, I can't, because I can't remember the name of the movie. Fuck. But there was this really cool movie that came out a couple of years ago, and the leading character's name is Star, and something like that. Basically, there was a great sit-down quote with her and her father, and he was talking about the infiltration of drugs into the Black community within this, and it's the idea of criminality within communities. The Hate You Give. That's wonderful. Yeah. So like.
Good book.
Yeah, good book, good movie. It's this idea that forms of criminality can be advocated for as forms of civil disobedience, but we have to remember, and this is my point, we have to remember that not all forms of criminality are the same. So, for example, you take it back to the civil rights era, the forms of criminality that arguably MLK was engaging in, which was, was breaking the law, it was forms of civil disobedience, are completely different to the forms of criminality that the Black Panthers were engaging in. And those are the two sort of strands, I'd say.
Or even to reinforce this a little bit, that sometimes there's perceived criminality, right? Like, if I think of the Mulford Act, I'm in California, and the fact that it was directly targeted to disarm Black people, specifically the Black Panthers, like, what they were doing was in complete confines of the law. But they basically were exposing the hypocrisy of it, where it's like, okay, if Black people do this, then there's going to be a very swift and clear response. And then even when they went to protest the law got even tighter. Because when they went to protest, they skirted in an amendment where that banned firearms and the public display of firearms in, I think, public and concealed display in federal buildings, when that didn't exist in the statute before. So it's like there's like there's like perceived criminality. That makes sense.
Sure, but to be clear, the claim is not and has never been that CRT is like trying to. Well, I mean, like, so CRT has never tried to just excuse any and all behavior committed by people of color.
No. If anything, I would say, like, in certain aspects, it's important to understand why individuals might react in a certain way that they do, right? Like, if you're in an area that's over police, like stop and frisk. If you're in an area that's over policed and you're in a group of individuals are disproportionately targeted, of course, people of that group are going to have negative interactions, but they might not have the best experience. The customer service might not be the best when you go and pat them down.
Like, I totally get that. Like, sure, when you, like, for example, there are several studies I had to look at to prepare for Kenosha that show that, like, over policing of areas is going to be like a very high, like, is one predictor of poverty, and then poverty is a really big predictor of violent crime, right? And so, like, it would make sense, and that tends to be like a big reason why it seems that people of color, especially in those areas, or like that people in those areas where there tends to be an overlap with people of color, tend to commit more violent crime, right? Like the 1350 statistic, right? Mm. But I mean, like, so what I'm hearing is essentially just like a descriptive analysis that, like, listen, when you have laws which are going to negatively impact a particular target demographic by virtue of, like, for example, over policing or similar kinds of laws, then that could lead people of that demographic to then go on and commit crime. That's not excusing the behavior. That's just describing, like, why it is happening. Is that kind of capturing the idea?
Yeah. Like, we're even trying to do that now with the Capitol, right? Where there's a incredible amount of pushback on the idea of, like, we should probably research how these people ended up in this situation, right? Like, we're like, instead of treating this like the end of the movie, let's treat this like the beginning, and then see how it led up to that. And I think that's something I feel we ought to do personally, like, because, and to use the crime example, you can jail an entire city. That's not going to stop the crime in the area. Like, or rather, let me rephrase that, like, to be a bit more direct. Like, you can arrest all the Black people you want, but Black on Black crime is still going to persist if you don't analyze why the Black on Black crime exists in the first place. And be very direct, right? Like, being as direct and deliberate as possible with your analysis. And then like, being, what's the word? Unafraid or unbashful, I think might be the word, in terms of the prescriptive policy changes that should happen. where it's like, we think that like we analyzed this, we found that like it's because of this, and this. Here are certain policy prescriptions that could definitely lead to solving these problems, and these are things that we ought to do. And then it should be like, okay, we paid for this thing to do this thing, so let's do the thing. Instead of the, well, you know, it might increase the taxes, and well, the state legislature is kind of divided right now, and I'm just invoking things that state representatives have told me in real time. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I mean, like, it's interesting because I mean, like, that makes entire sense. You know, like the idea that, you know, we just want to be able to like descriptively look at why these things happen and not, you know, like that is miles different from saying like, oh yeah, we're excusing all this behavior. You know, like that. Those are leagues different. And of course, we want to be able to like look at descriptively why these things happen, because that's the only way that we're going to actually be able to like get to any kind of meaningful solutions. You know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it adds to an important philosophical difference that split America into liberal and conservative here for the sake of the argument. But specifically when we're talking about criminality and crime, I think the term excuse is employed so much by conservatives because they traditionally hold a more punishment-based perspective of justice in comparison to a rehabilitative state of justice. And I think by asking questions of, well, why is this black crime being committed? Why are these reasons? Is it because of racism? Is there racism here? Et cetera, et cetera. When you ask those why questions, it becomes harder and harder to justify a system built simply to punish those who commit crimes. Because if you envisage a person that, you know, that stereotypical example that they probably give you at every 101 law seminar, the idea of like the man that's stealing cans of food for his starving children, etc. If society is structured in such a way that doesn't force people to commit crimes, but it pushes them to a certain probability of committing crimes, then can we entirely blame the individual for taking those actions?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Or even better, like something that really concerns me is that we're in a contract with the government. And the contract is like, you do good, we'll do good, right? Okay, let's shake on it. And then it's like, healthcare, please. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have had that soda for 20 years. And it's like, but I live in a food desert. It's like, my point is that sometimes the government doesn't really meet its end of the deal. And then instead of the government acknowledging, like, we made a mistake here, so let's try to right this ship so that we stay on our end of the agreement, there's this idea of like individuality. And like, well, you're only in this condition because of your own making. And if you just, you know, pulled yourself up by your bootstraps and got a job and moved out of mom's house, then of course you're going to make it. You know, I guess the door that I'm trying to knock at a little bit? Yeah. When in reality, sometimes certain situations can't just be bootstrapped away.
Yep.
Like, we can't bootstrap our ways to gay marriage or bootstrap our way to LGBT, any type of like LGBTQ plus legislation, civil rights legislation. That's not how that works. Like,
yeah. I
mean, unless it does, and I didn't get the memo.
No. Yeah, the point is salient. Insofar as like, you know, I think that Scott is absolutely right on this, right? Like, this probably is indicative of a much more fundamental issue where it's like, if we begin acknowledging these kinds of systemic discrepancies, then or these kind of systemic influences on individual behavior, especially in terms of criminality, then the idea of like retributive justice itself becomes very hard to justify, because like the whole idea of retributive justice is like people get what they deserve. But if someone doesn't really deserve something to begin with, then it becomes a lot harder to justify that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right.
Yeah.
Well, it's 11, so I think that's actually probably we've been talking for like 3 straight hours, so that might be a perfect time to draw to bring this conversation to a close.
Mhm.
Thank you both for talking. I really, really appreciated it. And I think that what we'll do is I'll post the stream VOD, since I'm dual streaming now. I'll post this to YouTube so that people, if they want to, they can watch this later. But also what I will do is we'll make this part, so like now from here going out, I'm going to be editing together and reviewing the stream at like the debate as it happened. I'll probably just make it critical race theory and just like keep it simplified. Like I'll probably, I don't know. If people want to, I can include the conversations on like transphobia and defund the police, although it seems like everyone was more focused on the critical race theory aspect, so it depends on what people are interested in. Because I mean, I don't know. I don't think that he had really any good arguments on like the transphobia aspects and the, yeah. But I don't know.
What
we
was
can.
the leading question of that again, if you don't mind me asking?
What was the leading question? It was so like, how do you define transphobia? And then I defined it, and no one seemed to disagree with me really. And then, and then the moderator. Yeah, and then the moderator asked, "All right, so what do you think of like Joe Rogan's take on trans athletes?" And I responded, and he gave like a shitty ass, or yeah, I don't know. He gave like the standard answer of like, "Oh, well, sports categories are made to protect women." And then I responded to that and like, "No, it's not. We can think of plenty of examples where it's like the categories exist irrespective of whether or not they would like protect women, right? Like for example, with track or swimming, like the whole point of them is to maximize fairness is the idea." Sure. And so like he just kind of rolled over on that one, and then we got into the the defund the police, and no one really advocated for defund the police. So I don't know, it was just kind of like a discussion about the study, and I don't know, we could go back over the study if people want to, because he tried to like
in terms of, sorry, not to cut you off.
No, you're all good. Go ahead.
Of trans athletes and trans athletics, I say, hot take, let people hoop and figure it out later. All right, like if it comes to like 10 years down the line, a demographic of people are dominating them, maybe figure it out. But even then, I don't know. Let people ball.
Right. Well, I mean, it's it becomes an issue. So like, if I want to steel man the turf position, basically it can become an issue because we award a lot of financial scholarships based on how people compete in sports. So like that's like the steel man turf position. And then also, so that's at like the high school level. And then if we want to talk about like, I don't know, it seems like I otherwise, like that aside, and that's probably more criticism of like the education system, the fact that people have to compete to be able to like get funding for schooling. I think that kind of what you're talking about is like a fundamental difference between like how people value like sports, right? Like a lot of like, for me personally, I don't really like see sports as like, I don't see the point of sports as proving that you're better than other people. I see it as like something that's supposed to like build community and camaraderie, right? At which point I don't really care about like who competes with who. But like if the whole point is like having like some kind of like genuine or as close to a genuine meritocracy as we can so that people can prove themselves or whatever, like if that's the value judgment that we make as society, then we have to try and maximize fairness. Yeah, like Pixie, I know that we have talked before about like an ALO system, or like trying to implement an ALO system would probably be the best way to be able to implement it, because like having the system that we have right now, while it's aimed at achieving fairness, isn't good at well, it's not like it's still very flawed. So it's probably better ways of doing it.
Is that might be, if I'm thinking this correctly, that's kind of what happens already with drum corps. I think I'd have to look at the DCI rules, but like you have all male drum corps, you have integrated drum corps, and there's no real difference. And
right. People would argue that like drum corps are substantively different from like certain kinds of athletic sports where the effects of testosterone are going to make it that people are conferred specific athletic advantage disproportionately over other groups of people who are not conferred that advantage. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't know.
I should preface, or I should have clarified that there is the turf take in DCI, but that's a story for another day.
That sounds good. All right, I'm gonna drop it.
Yeah.
All right. Also, hold on. I've been meaning to do this for a second. So let's see. Gonna do this, that. Hey, McCheese, you got a blue name. Congratulations. All right, I'm leaving the call.
Pog. Thank you. Have fun.
Go check out, what do you call it? Go check out Rules and Expectations. It explains everything, just to shortcut it. All right, I'll talk to you later, all right?
Yeah, have a good night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was productive. That was a very productive stream. I learned a lot. So now, from here on out, I think that that's going to be like the main conversation that we're going to be having on that. So what we will do is, from streams here on out, we're going to be just reviewing the debate and going over the relevant literature, and learning more. And it's going to be like, so this stream VOD will go up, but we're just going to be like editing together. So we have like one very high quality video. Great stream. Yeah, no, that was incredibly productive. Hey, fam, there you go. Yeah, it worked out. By the way, if you haven't done so already, join the Discord. See this chat right here? Hey, Discord chat, make the sell right now. We gotta get those people. We gotta get them in here. Use those animated emotes we got. Oh, actually, you know what? I'll do a Discord. I'll do a Nitro giveaway. Yeah, if you get in here in the next like minute or so, then I'll do a Nitro giveaway. So, woohoo, it's warm. Come here. Yeah. So basically, yeah, no, I felt like it was really nice. I thought it was good to dual stream. It was cool because there's a lot of people who joined the community who I'm sure haven't done so already. I like streaming to YouTube. Yeah, it's all good. All right, so that's great. Here, let's server boost. The only thing I'll ask is that if you happen to get it, I'm just going to drop it in chat, whoever gets it first. I'm just going to ask, if you already have Discord Nitro, don't grab it. And then if you do get it, just boost the server. Since I stream out of Discord, then, you know, it helps. So there, 3. Actually, hold on. I'm going to go pee first, and then I'll come back, and then I will do, and then I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to drop it. So get in the chat right now. Get in there. Do it. I see you. All right. Be right back. Hello there. Hello there, General Kenobi. Oh my god, amazing. Oh yeah, no, we have all the Pepe emotes now. Yeah, all you fucking internet degenerates. Yeah, no, we have your Hello Kitty for boyos in here. Isn't that what Pepe is? It's literally like, I'm sorry, Pepe is literally just Hello Kitty for guys. That's the hot take. the lack of ye emotes disturbs me. Wait, hold on. Just put a ye emote in chat, and then we'll steal it. All right. If someone like has a ye emote that they put in the chat, then I can just like steal it and have it be in our server. All right, gonna do the giveaway in 3, 2, 1. Bam. Yi is better character than Pepe, but Yi is just the emote. Yeah, I know. Can't use external. Hold on, wait. All right, see, the only one that I'm in is the Destiny.gg one. I don't want to steal like Destiny's because it's like made to. Oh, hey. Hey, thank you. All right, there we go. Give me some yees in chat. Now you have ye. Congratulations. Let me see them yees in chat. I have given you what you asked for. Thank you, Tiraki. Thank you. Yeah, there you go. Enjoy your yees. This is why I like the hype emotes, because they're good character designs with lots of poses, cute femme, Pepe replacements. Yeah, I like that. But now we got representation for everyone. All right. Ye never ever lose. All right. I'm not gonna get into that. Although I will say that I use I say ye a lot in my colloquial, like just like me speaking. So I say it more in my everyday vernacular. All right. Twitch, tell me who you want me to raid you into. Oh, hey, Darth. Thank you for subscribing. I appreciate it. One thing I will say is I am offboarding from affiliate. So if you want to support me financially, the best place to do it is Patreon. There's even, well, here, I'll show you all. Patreon. There you go. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can do so there. You also get colored names for my chat. That'd be the best way to do it. Or if you just want to donate to me, you can do so there. All right. So thank you all. But yeah, otherwise I'm offboarding from Twitch so that I can be able to dual stream, bring more people into the community and facilitate better discussion. That seems to be probably the best thing. And also like the platform that I use, like using this chat and using Patreon as like my primary source of income, like works for dual streaming. It works very well for dual streaming. So I'm going to keep doing that and do it more, because tonight was a really good stream. There's like a lot of good turnout. I think YouTube streams would be good. Yeah, no, I agree. It means I'm going to take like, because Twitch is like, you can get a lot of money from Twitch. But unfortunately it means like, so you get a lot of money, but you don't grow as much, or you don't grow your community as much. And I want to grow the community. That's mostly what I'm interested in, right? If I take a little bit of a pay cut, then, you know, I think it's worth it to ultimately facilitate like better discussion. So yeah. All right. Let me know in chat who you want to, yeah. The big thing is everyone's been using a side chat. Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let me know who you want me to raid you into. Otherwise, let me get like my favorite outro music just to kind of like hit it home. Let's see. And let me know in chat who you want me to raid you all into. Have a good night. Bye.
của chúng tôi. Đây là ưu đãi của chúng tôi.
Caoく空中に染め日の